Hello and welcome to this edition of the NAESP Advocacy Podcast. My name is Danny Carlson. I am NAESP's Associate Executive Director for Policy and Advocacy. And today I'm delighted to be joined by two wonderful guests from the Learning Policy Institute. They are Stephanie Levin and Caitlin Scott. In today's podcast, we're going to discuss an exciting new report that NAESP has collaborated on with LPI. Specifically, we're going to talk about the impetus for this report, some of the key findings, as well as the broader implications of principal professional development and what it all means for the profession going forward. But before we jump into that report, let's have our two guests introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about the Learning Policy Institute.
Hi, thank you, Danny. I'm really glad to be here today and talk with all of you. I'm Caitlin Scott. I'm the Research Director at the Learning Policy Institute. We conduct and communicate independent, high-quality research to improve education policy and practice. To do this, we work with policymakers, researchers, educators, community groups, and other organizations like NAESP. We do this work to advance evidence-based policies that support empowering and equitable learning for each and every child. We're nonprofit and nonpartisan.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Levin. I'm also very happy to be here. I'm a research manager at the Learning Policy Institute, and much of my work at Learning Policy Institute, or LPI, focuses on school leadership. And I was the lead researcher on the study of principal professional learning that we worked on with NAESP. LPI has studied principal preparation and professional development for a number of years, building on seminal work of Linda Darling Hammond and her colleagues in 2007. And LPI, we're now celebrating our 5th anniversary. We conducted our first major study of principal learning as part of a larger research initiative called Getting Down to Facts 2, that provided in-depth analysis of California's education system as of 2018. And it looked at what was working well and where improvement was needed. Since then, LPI has conducted other studies looking at principal professional development nationally and at the state level. And this ongoing work has been funded by the Wallace Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, and the Stewart Foundation.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Caitlin and Stephanie. This is really, really great. I've been looking forward to chatting with both of you for a while. This report came out in October, and it focused on professional learning for principals, which is such an important topic for our members, but really for the profession sort of writ large, and really for K-12 education. But before we kind of talk about that report and what's in it and sort of why we did it, let's kind of talk a little bit larger picture. So when we think of principals and sort of their roles in schools and leading schools, a buzzword in the field is in sort of instructional leaders and talking and sort of thinking about principals as in these roles and sort of how that impacts student achievement. So let's talk a little bit more about that and really who are principals in schools and sort of how do they impact student achievement.
Great. Yes, school principals are really essential for ensuring that students have access to strong educational opportunities and then can be successful. So from our childhood memories, all of us probably remember a principal. I remember my middle school principal who met the bus every morning and waved to all the kids and sent us off to school to do well. That's just the tip of the iceberg, though. When I became a teacher early in my career, I learned that principals really did make a difference right down into instruction. So I taught at Oakland School in Virginia, and my assistant principal who mentored me, Carol Smychek, observed my classroom. Sometimes she modeled instruction for me as a new teacher. She really talked about what I could do to make things better in my classroom and to ensure that every student succeeded. And importantly, she pointed out great professional learning opportunities for me that worked for me as a teacher and also that have helped me understand education as a whole. So you can see that principals really have a strong way of influencing teachers, influencing classrooms, influencing students. And I think this is going to be even more important when principals and schools need to address emergency situations, such as many schools have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Principals are really critical in leading schools and connecting teachers and students to great instruction, and also bringing in the community. Stephanie is going to talk some more about our research findings about why principals are so important and what the research literature really says about why principals make a difference.
Thanks, Catlin. So there is very strong evidence that principals can influence student outcomes. 6 rigorous research studies have been conducted with data from 4 states and 2 urban school districts, which have demonstrated that an increase in principal effectiveness increases the typical student's effectiveness in both math and reading. And in a forthcoming report, researchers have synthesized these studies and found that the impact of having an effective principal on student achievement is nearly as large as the effect of having an analogously effective teacher. And when you consider the number of students that a principal touches, you realize how very important they are for student learning. In addition to influencing student achievement, effective principal leadership can also influence student attendance, exclusionary discipline, and teacher turnover. Researchers at LPI and elsewhere have identified 5 categories of principal practices associated with positive school outcomes. These 5 categories include instructional leadership, which calls for having interactions with teachers that are focused on instruction and selecting effective curriculum strategies and materials. 2, leading and managing school improvement. And this includes using student and school data to inform continuous school improvement. Shaping teaching and learning conditions, which includes creating and maintaining collegial and collaborative work environments. Developing people, which includes facilitating collaboration and professional learning communities, and helping teachers improve through observation and feedback. And importantly, meeting the needs of all learners, which includes English learners and students with disabilities. And this final category, meeting the needs of all learners, includes principals' efforts to serve all children equitably.
Yeah, great, thanks. That is a really great encapsulation of the principal role, which is very sort of multi-tiered and involves a lot of sort of facets of the work and the impact. But I think what you both sort of shared there really speaks to this really sort of singular role that principals play. And the work that LPI has done is you know, that we can't sort of just have a hunch that this work happens and we think principals are important, but you know, that the research really bears this out, that there are things to point to that show that you know, the impacts of what it means to have a high quality school leader leading a school building. So thanks for that. So let's transition a little bit into this notion of professional learning, which is the focus of the report. We sort of talked about the role of the principal, kind of you know, I guess big picture, but in thinking about that importance in that role that they play, how does professional learning and what professional learning looks like, why do principals even need professional learning?
That's a great question. You know, I really believe that all of us need professional learning and coaching and things that we can improve in our careers, and principals are just no exception. However, as you heard from Stephanie, I will tell you the research also supports the idea that principals in particular need high quality professional learning opportunities. I want to give you just an example. In LPI's case study research, we looked recently at Sanger Unified School District in California's Central Valley. During the accountability era of No Child Left Behind, Sanger really earned the reputation as a turnaround district, a district that really wasn't meeting the needs of students and didn't have high achievement, to one that was a really high achieving district, particularly given the location of the school and poverty levels and community there. So this district continues to be high performing. How do they do that? Well, initially, Sanger really invested in professional learning for all the adults in the school and really connected with community groups, seeing what students needed, and really brought their staff up to speed. They didn't stop there, though. They actually have annual refreshing for all principals and bringing new principals on board as well. And they call this repainting the Golden Gate Bridge. So each year there's a repainting. It really speaks to the need for continual professional learning, not because people forget, but because people need to develop and stay up to speed on the new things that their students need and the new innovations that are coming out of education research. So I would say that is why professional learning is so important for these principals and for the teachers that the principals serve. Research also shows us that principals who have access to high quality professional learning typically remain in the profession. So a district like Sanger invests in principals and they stay, they deepen their practice through professional learning. Also, very importantly, teachers appear to remain in districts when principals have that professional learning and are able to lead their schools effectively.
That's really compelling, and sort of thinking about the profession, not in sort of in the narrow focus of professional learning, like that you're getting training, but actually in the broader picture of sort of support for principals. And what you said about we all needing support and training, in that way, someone once made the analogy, that Tiger Woods, who's played thousands of rounds of golf, he has a coach, and a couple times a week he gets he gets support, even being one of the best at his craft. And so, but yeah, no, that's a really great point. So Stephanie, let's talk a little sort of concretely. What does high quality professional learning actually look like?
Well, the most effective professional learning follows from what we know about successful principals. Principals need specific knowledge and skills to be successful in helping their schools meet the academic standards and the demands of students from all backgrounds. They also need professional development content delivered in ways that are authentic and job embedded. And this approach is most likely to influence principals' knowledge, beliefs, and ultimately their practice. So I'll start by saying something about the content of professional learning. High quality professional learning covers content that supports principals in learning how to manage change, how to create collegial teaching and learning environments, and how to improve school-wide instruction. Just to provide a little bit more detail, managing change really includes using student and school data to inform continuous school improvement. And this could include examining formative student assessments to determine what types of curricular materials to pilot in teachers' classrooms. Creating collegial teaching and learning environments could involve working with various school community stakeholders, including parents, educators, and other partners, creating a school environment that uses discipline for restorative practices, and designing the school's organization and structure to support deeper learning for teachers and students. Improving school-wide instruction includes leading instruction that focuses on developing students' higher order thinking, raising school-wide achievement, and selecting effective curricular strategies and materials. And improving school-wide instruction is an important goal for principals, especially in the face of the challenges related to COVID-19 pandemic and the inequities it has exposed. Recent research points to the need for learning opportunities and instructional improvement that take a whole child approach to teaching and learning. And this includes providing students with challenging, in-depth learning opportunities, meeting their physical needs, and supporting their social and emotional learning. Also, principals should be equipped to create equitable schools grounded in principles of social justice. And this content helps principals to work towards counteracting the harm of racism and discrimination.
Yeah.
I was going to turn it over to Catlin to talk a little bit more about that.
Great.
Great. Yeah. thanks, Stephanie, for the content focus there. And you could tell I wanted to jump in right away. The content is so important. Also, though, the content has to be delivered in ways that principals can really take it in. So there are three things I want to talk about in terms of how to make that professional learning content really stick with principals and really come alive. So first, these experiences need to be applied learning experiences. So learning research in general demonstrates that people of all ages learn and transfer their knowledge and skills best in contexts that are similar to real world situations. So this is true for principals as well. So instead of sort of an off-the-shelf general professional learning content should really engage with the real world problems that are in principal schools and should really try to draw on the strengths of principals, teachers, and their community. So applied learning experiences, real world stuff. Second, and Stephanie, you touched on this as well, mentoring and coaching is really important for principals. And this is what my assistant principal did for me when I was a young teacher, really working one-on-one with new teachers to learn the profession. And then also mentoring and coaching for experienced teachers can always just give people that edge. It can give them support when they're trying something new or when they're really deepening a practice. So that's the second thing. And then third, networks for principals are really important. It's fine to have, one day professional development event if then it's embedded in something that helps teachers and principals process what they've learned. So these networks for principals and sometimes for principals with teachers combined can really help embed the practice. And I want to give another example from our California case study research. Chula Vista is a district that has really focused on professional learning all around, and also on that role of principal as instructional leader. So in that district, for networks, principals have professional learning communities called principal cohorts. So it's 8 to 10 principals. They meet, they talk about best practices and challenges across their schools. But then each principal is also working with an instructional leadership team of teachers in their own school. So they're connecting the principal learning to what's really going to happen in their own school. And this sort of practice just brings all that content knowledge that they need together into something that is actionable at the school level. And that's how principals can really be instructional leaders and make a difference overall.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I in listening to you both, I was struck by the example of, this is professional learning, this is sort of on the job training, but how many through lines and analogs there are to pre-service training, and what LPI and others have done really great looks at the importance of sort of clinical based preparation and residency models and sort of what that means. And I'm hearing you talk about authentic job embedded opportunities, and it seems like principals need that before they enter the profession, and then once they're in it, it's not just a kick them out to sort of figure it out on your own. That this is an ongoing process, and sort of the need for that is there. So that was really helpful. Thank you for that. Let's talk about the report. So this is something I will just say from NAESP's perspective. Professional learning is a extraordinary need and something that our members are really sort of keyed in on in both sort of in surveys that we do, and sort of saying that they need more opportunities for it. In terms of our federal advocacy efforts, one of our big areas of focus is the Title II program at the federal level, and ensuring that states and districts have funds to be able to do professional learning. So we're really keyed in on this. This is something that we are sort of care a lot about and want to improve what it means for principals and those opportunities. And so we collaborated with you all at the Learning Policy Institute to conduct this study, to get a sort of pulse of what's happening with professional learning for principals. What are some areas of need? And ultimately, we want to think about, at least from our perspective, is how we can help potentially make some improvements to the policy and practice of professional learning. So, but yeah, let's jump in. Stephanie, do you want to share some of the key findings from of the study?
Absolutely. I first want to say, with thanks to NAESP, we were fortunate to be able to conduct a national survey of elementary school principals. I think I have to wait till my phone stops ringing. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm sorry. So fortunately, with support from NAESP, we conducted a national survey of elementary school principals to better understand principals' professional learning experiences. Our findings are based on this survey, and I'll start by sharing our findings in 4 areas. First, principals' access to professional development content and participation in authentic, job-embedded professional learning opportunities. Principals' perceived needs for additional professional development, the obstacles principals face to participating in professional learning, and district supports for principal professional learning. So many elementary school principals reporting having had access to professional development content that's important for developing school leadership capacity. Over 80% of principals had the opportunity to participate in professional development content focused on managing change, creating collegial teaching and learning environments, and improving school-wide instruction. 98% of principals said they had access to professional development content and using student and school data for continuous school improvement. And I'll share a few more survey findings. 95% of principals reporting having access to professional development about helping teachers improve through cycles of observation and feedback. Principals were likely to have participated in professional development in leading equitable schools. 95% had content in meeting the needs of students with disabilities. 91% had content in equitably serving all children. 88% had content in leading schools to support students from diverse backgrounds, and 86% had content in meeting the needs of English learners. However, far fewer principals indicated that they were able to participate in authentic learning opportunities. So to get at this, we asked principals if they had engaged in applied learning experience of sharing their leadership practices with peers in the past 2 years. We asked if they had a mentor or coach in the past 2 years, and we asked if they had participated in principal network in the past 2 years. And we found that fewer than 1/3 of all principals were able to spend time sharing leadership practices with their peers 3 or more times in the past 2 years. We also found that less than 1/4 of principals responding to the survey reported having a mentor or coach in the previous 2 years. And this percentage was even lower for principals in high poverty schools. And we did find that engagement in professional learning communities was reported by just over half of elementary school principals. So that's better, but still nearly half of principals responding to our survey did not have this opportunity. So while it appears that elementary school principals did have access to important content, many reported wanting more professional development content, and a desire for content related to supporting whole child education was identified most frequently. Principals also reported wanting more professional development content in leading equitable schools by supporting diverse learners and addressing issues of equity in their schools. Fourth finding is that many principals reported facing obstacles to participating in professional learning. The top 3 barriers listed were related to time and resources. So 2/3 of the principals responding to the survey reported not having enough time to participate in professional learning. Over 2/5 reported that there was insufficient coverage, so there was no one to kind of cover them so they could leave the building. And over 2/5 reported that they did not have enough money or the resources. And this was even greater concern for principals serving schools with high percentages students of color.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie, for that. I was thinking back to our conversation just a few minutes ago, and you started walking through what good sort of high quality professional development look like, and then as it relates to this report, it's more complicated than this, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that principals, have, in general, across the board, have access to professional learning, but what that looks like and the quality of that and the opportunities for some of these sort of key pieces, job embedded practice, learning in cohorts, things like that, huge amounts of variance on that. So let's talk a little bit about that, though. Let's dig into that a second. So Catlin, in thinking about districts, there's districts are stretched in a lot of different ways in providing needs for not just principals, but teachers and other support staff, and sort of all of the challenges that districts face in terms of needs. But there does seem to be some some good models here in terms of how principals can be supported. There's some research to back up some of these things, like principal pipelines, and how do you effectively prepare, support, and extend the talent of school leaders. But what do you think that is? Why is there a gap in terms of states and districts' sort of ability to be able to provide this at scale?
Right. I think that's a really important question. So let's look at the barriers again. Stephanie mentioned that from the survey, we found out that principals were reporting not enough time for this professional learning, insufficient coverage for leaving the building so that someone to take responsibilities if they need to go out for professional learning, and then not enough money. So those are the three big things. And these are more of a challenge in schools serving high percentages of students of color. So these are serious challenges, right? I think that it's important to just acknowledge that districts are addressing multiple priorities, and they often have limited resources, and sometimes that's beyond their control with state and federal funding. But we do also have case studies that show districts like Sanger and Chula Vista in California that face those challenges and are able to overcome them. So it is possible. It's partially will, knowing that it's important, being able to do it, and then making the most of those resources that you have. Another thing that you didn't mention yet, though, Danny, is that, I do feel that the research on principal professional learning has been somewhat limited, especially when you compare that to the body of research about teacher professional learning. So I think it partially, just one step in the right direction, I think, is getting the word out about the research that professional learning for principals does make a difference, and really hoping that this will influence more district leaders, state leaders, and federal policymakers to invest in this and to make it possible at the school level for principals to take advantage of professional learning. So I think the important work that NAESP is doing in this regard makes a difference. And I hope that this study that Stephanie and team have brought forward will also make a difference here.
Yeah. Stephanie, did you want to add anything else to any of those areas that you raised?
No, I think that Catlin got it all. I think it's exciting, the work that you're doing, sharing this information right here in the podcast, and your members have done to respond to the survey and share their experiences so we can get this information out there.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot for 1 second. I'm curious, because one thing that you hear from folks, and I think, Stephanie, maybe you have sort of, you said it in earlier, was this challenge about professional development, professional learning, meeting the needs of your individual school, and it not, even if it's really good content, and even if it's job embedded and some of these really important things, what's your sense of sort of some of the factors at play there in terms of challenges in sort of providing that to principals, but also really that importance of that I as a principal can, that the professional learning I'm receiving, that the support I'm receiving, I feel like it's applicable to my school, to my students, to the set of teachers that I support.
So you're asking why this doesn't happen more, why principals don't have access to this? I think it's a really tough question. There are so many competing priorities. There aren't enough resources for schools to do everything they have to do. And in this environment, even more so. Catlin started off by talking about the many responsibilities that school leaders have. And it's completely true. They're juggling all the time, as are teachers in their classrooms. I think it's it's just a matter of kind of figuring out what it is we getting the information out, making the case that professional learning for principals will help them be more effective, and just and having a greater understanding of the value of education in our society for making sure that all students can be successful. And I think we just keep working at it, and all the work that NAESP has done and other organizations like yours, really fighting for your members, for the school leaders, but on behalf of the students in the country to make sure that we can serve them as best as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the sort of takeaways from the study, which emerged, which is interesting given some previous studies that we have done with our members, is on the notion of that folks indicated wanting additional professional development around whole child and whole child education and sort of SEL. We do our NAESP does our 10-year study every 10 years, and in 2018 the sort of issue that folks indicated was of sort of highest importance, significance, the one that they really that they really keyed in on was SEL, was social emotional learning, kind of whole child. And it's interesting now that in this survey, in this study, that it emerged again as folks indicating that this is an area that they wanted additional support. So Catlin, what do you think's kind of at play there with this this focus of sort of whole child?
Yeah, well, I have to tell you that when Stephanie's team was first reporting to the rest of LPI on what the survey findings were, this was one of the things that people were really excited about at LPI. This finding that whole child education is something that principals want more of. We're really seeing that more and more educators and principals overall are seeing the promise of whole child education. And you mentioned the socio-emotional aspect of whole child education, and that is really key for sure. Whole child education also is broader. It really recognizes all the areas of children's development and how they're connected, right? So instead of focusing on discrete facts like, here's the multiplication tables for 6s, they're really hard. As a teacher, I taught that was really hard for kids. Instead of just focusing on that, you're really focusing on everything that the child is learning and experiencing. So you're focusing on the teamwork in the discovery learning activity, where you have children learn about groups and sets and how that relates to multiplication, and apply that then to some real world situations where they might be thinking about distributing things to groups of 6 children working in a classroom. So yes, it really contains everything. And I want to really also point out that it includes, whole child education includes challenging in-depth learning opportunities. So it's not just socio-emotional learning, although social emotional learning is clearly very important. That's the environment that children are learning in. You can't really separate that from the learning itself. And then also the third thing is students' physical needs. And I think this has become more apparent in the time of COVID as schools struggle to make sure that they're still providing services such as lunch to students, that the students have broadband, so that students have the things physically that they need to do a great job. So that's why I think this is really an important issue, particularly right now, and why I'm so excited that this research is bringing that forward to the public, that whole child education, that those types of approaches are really going to be important. To do whole child education well, you need a strong principal leader to bring that to the whole school. So learning about that and continually deepening practice for principals is really important. I think, Stephanie, if you could remind people of some of the findings in particular that related to whole child education from the survey, I think that would probably be helpful to illustrate kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we asked a number of questions in our survey that really get at the idea of whole child education. And we found that 83% of principals reported that they wanted more content on leading schools and supporting students' social emotional development. 82% of principals wanted additional content in developing systems supporting children's physical and mental health. 76% of principals wanted additional content in creating an environment that develops responsible young people. 75% of principals wanted additional content in redesigning the school organization or the structure for deeper learning. 74% of principals wanted additional content in creating an environment that uses discipline for restorative purposes. And in the last item, 73% of principals wanted additional content in leading instruction on developing students' higher order thinking skills. And I think it's also helpful to point out some differences by school characteristic. We found differences between the responses of principals in cities and those in other types of communities. There were significantly more principals in rural communities that wanted professional development on developing systems to support children's physical and mental health compared to principals in cities, which could be because they have less access to this kind of professional learning opportunity. We also found that suburban and rural principals were most likely to report wanting more professional development in virtually every area. Again, perhaps because their smaller school districts are less able to offer a wide range of professional development options.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, some of those numbers, the 80%, 75% of folks saying that is pretty pretty overwhelming in terms of the need and the desire on those areas. And I think something you said about it being you know, to implement something school-wide, like you know, like a focus on whole child or SEL, or even in other areas we've seen things, you know, a desire to increase in school mental health supports, right? Like that requires a principal who feels well equipped and supported to be able to kind of do that work. And this sort of speaks to that. I think even anecdotally in talking with members, you hear that, you know, the importance of whole child and understanding it and why it matters and how it needs to be integrated into the school culture. But how to do that and what does that look like, and actually having the training behind that, and also just the, you know, there's uneven pre-service training on some of that. You know, some folks may have received that before they became principal, others not. So what your research really showed, I thought that was great, was that this is a huge area of interest and need for principals, and they articulated it in a way that said that this is really to the, you know, the specificity of professional learning, the content of what that is and exactly what they need. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Let's shift for the final couple minutes here. Let's take a look at, in thinking about some of the findings of the report, and some of the gaps maybe that exist, and some of the opportunities in thinking about future public policy. What does this show in terms of some opportunities to support improved professional learning for principals in the future? So Stephanie, maybe you want to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So in our report, we finished it up by doing exactly what you said, thinking through what the implications of the report were of our findings for policymakers. And we looked at this at the different levels of policymakers. So at the district level, then at the state, and then at the federal level. And then we think about what school leaders themselves can do. So I'm going to start by presenting what we know and think should happen at the local level. And then Catlin can share a little bit more about what states and federal level policymakers can do to support this district work. So first of all, local policymakers can ensure that professional learning for principals embody the key features related to content and delivery that help principals be most impactful. And we've talked a lot about that in the report. Professional development at the local level should focus on improving school-wide instruction for whole child education. And relevant content should include professional development in supporting students' social emotional development and physical and mental health, as well as creating school environments that develop responsible young people and foster critical thinking. And this content could be particularly valuable to school leaders as they support their communities due to the trauma and other challenges related to COVID-19. Professional development should focus on fostering equitable school environments, and this content would develop principals' capacities to create supportive, unbiased school environment that affirms each child as an individual and builds on students' cultural assets through culturally responsive teaching, and fosters strong, trusting relationships among students and between students and adults. And principals should have meaningful applied learning experiences that are problem-based and context-specific. For example, school walkthroughs with peers or analyzing student data to identify problems can enrich principals' skills development. And principals should also have access to mentors or coaches who provide principals with individualized support tailored to their needs. And this is true for principals at all levels of experience. And principals should have opportunities to participate in collaborative learning, such as networks of practicing principals. Effective learning, which uses professional learning communities or other network structures to enable school principals to collaborate in small groups of peers in order to learn on the job together, allows principals to reflect continuously on their learning, individually and collectively. And importantly, local policymakers can remove barriers to principal professional development. District leaders can consider remedies such as providing district staff support that frees principals' time and offering principal professional development at more convenient times or locations, possibly even on Zoom. As many schools continue to operate in remote and hybrid learning models, districts have this unique opportunity to plan and execute high-quality virtual principal professional development. And districts and schools can use both local and federal funds under the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, Title II, Part A, to provide funds for professional development. Now I'm going to hand it over to Catlin to talk a little bit more about what federal and state policymakers can do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephanie. Lots happens at the local level, but state policy makes a difference and federal policy makes a difference. So first I'll talk about federal policy. There are a couple of ways that federal policymakers can support local efforts. I think that there is now funding, and increasing federal funding could help with this. Funding at the federal level comes through the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, Title I, Part A, the part for school improvement, and also ESSA Title II, Part A for professional development, and a bit from ESSA Title II, Part B under the School Leader Recruitment and Support Program. So within each of these programs, there's funds. we can do a lot with those funds. We can prioritize funds, and federally, we can also provide guidance for curriculum for principals that's focused on some of the things that our study showed principals want more professional learning on. So prioritizing improving school-wide instruction for whole child education, taking a whole child approach to education. That's one of the areas that really could be impactful. Also, fostering equitable school environments could be really impactful, and our survey showed that people are interested in this type of professional learning as well. I want to reiterate that also it matters how this learning happens. So federal policies and guidance can prioritize and encourage professional learning for principals that's collaborative, that is meaningful application of learning experiences, that has individualized supports from coaches and mentors, and that prioritizes work within networks for principals. Now, this federal support in funding could be increased in the future. As we all know, ESSA goes up for reauthorization following this 2021 school year. So sometime in the future, there'll be an opportunity to increase funding for these types of important programs that can support principal professional learning. So states also make a difference. And in fact, the federal things that I talked about funnel down to states who then put that funding into the districts. So states also make a difference here. States can allocate 5% of their statewide set-asides for statewide activities under ESSA Title II Part A for teacher learning and for leader development. So it's not just for teachers, it also can be for leaders. And states are allowed to take an additional 3% exclusively for leadership investments. So this is an important way that states can allocate funds. Okay, and I wanted to tell you, there are a few examples of the ways that states have been using these funds. For example, Arkansas, Maryland, and Texas use the funds to support mentoring and induction for new principals. States can also use the funds for, again, our networks for principals and, of course, for the important coaching and mentoring that principals need. Okay. In addition to these funds that are specifically for professional learning for principals, ESSA Title I Part A school improvement funds can be used by states to support principals as they improve schools. So these funds are really focused on those schools that are really trying to change and make things different. We've seen that the plans for the use of ESSA funds show that many states are already saying, let's have some of these funds for our principals. For example, Colorado's plan invests in leadership for high poverty and high minority schools. Vermont's invests in training for principals to advance equitable access to great teachers, again, in these schools that have been identified as wanting to improve, as making plans to improve. Connecticut and Oklahoma's plans are actually prioritizing trainers for school turnaround leaders. So these are principals that are really going to work with a school that's making important changes. I think this use of federal funds is really important, but states can even go beyond that. Some states are using their own funding to support principal professional learning, particularly principal leadership academies. And these are things that offer professional learning, but also networking, coaching, and mentoring, you know, a really robust set of professional learning experiences. States like Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Georgia, and North Carolina have made significant investments in these types of leadership academies and other initiatives that support principals throughout their career in robust ways rather than just a one-shot professional learning experience. So in summary, I think there's just a lot that can be done with the funds that we have now through the federal funding stream and through state funding streams. And we could increase that in the future when opportunities arise.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was a really, really great summary from both of you about opportunities really to think about, what this report sort of elevated and also sort of reinforced on some of these things that we know that when districts or states, really invest in professional learning for principals and think about intentional investments and to really think about what that is and what principals in their states need, that the impact is really clear. And it really is, talking about all of the funding, but thinking about this as a high leverage investment, one that is money and investments are investments, but in thinking about of all the money in sort of the K-12 ecosystem, that if done well, this can have an enormous impact on sort of the quality and the scope of high quality school leadership in your state, in your district, and as was mentioned earlier, the likelihood that folks are more likely to stay in the profession and sort of have a greater effect on instructional leadership in their school. So those are really, really great points and great ideas. So thanks for that. And thank you both for joining us on this. Stephanie Levin is the research manager at the Learning Policy Institute. Caitlin Scott is the research director at the Learning Policy Institute. They both were instrumental in really getting this report off the ground and carrying it through. And I think is really, really important for the field and for the profession. And I think is also an opportunity for you listening, NAESP members and others, but if you are a principal, take a look at this report. I'll put a link in the show page for you to click on and to read through. But think about what this means, and maybe it sparks something in you and thinking about having a conversation with maybe your school board or your superintendent and starting a conversation about sort of, the need and the opportunity here for professional learning for principals in your district and you personally. So thanks, Stephanie and Caitlin, so much. Look forward to continuing to work with LPI. I encourage everyone listening as well to go onto the Learning Policy Institute's website. Just an enormous amount of information and research on many topics and other topics and many things in sort of the K-12 field. So thanks to you both, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Danny. Appreciate it.